You weren't supposed to find it. Not here. Not in this hollow that folds like a wound beneath the spine of eastern Kentucky. You were following a line on a map, an old government assignment to measure runoff for a dam project. Nothing remarkable, nothing cursed, just topography and soil. But the trail gave way to silence, and the air changed. Thicker, older, like something had been held too long. The ground beneath your boots turns from soil to something brittle. Not stone, not bone, just the kind of hardness that remembers pressure. You push through bramble, through pine thick as a wall, until it parts around you like breath stilled in a lung. And there it is, the house, not ruined, not weathered, just wrong. A structure untouched by time but unraveled by something else. The boards sag with the weight of silence. The roof bows not with age, but with obedience. It obeys the stillness, obeys the thing that lives in quiet. There's no driveway, no chimney smoke, no mailbox, no path, just moss swallowing what once resembled steps, and iron driven through a door like it was never meant to open. The windows are sealed. From the inside, every one. Black pitch has been smeared across the glass like someone wanted even the light to forget what it saw. A rusted sheet of metal is bolted across the entrance, spiked shut like a coffin. There's no sign anyone ever entered. No sign anyone ever left. No noise, no rot, no wind. Just the overwhelming feeling that the woods are waiting for you to step closer. And you do, because you have to, because it's not just a house. It's a secret that buried itself alive. And now it wants to be seen. You're not the first to stand here, but you might be the last to understand why no one else ever came back. You're about to hear what officials erased from the record books. If you can stomach it, hit subscribe. And if you can't, the comment section is waiting. Tell us why you'd rather not remember this. The lock gave way with a noise that didn't echo, just dropped, like a sound that had been waiting too long to be released. The door creaked open, not with resistance, but with surrender. And the moment you stepped inside, the air shifted again. Not musty, not dead, just preserved. Dust hung in the room, not in swirls, but in layers, like sediment on the ocean floor, as though time hadn't passed through here but settled. The floorboards didn't groan. They listened. To the left, 6 beds, iron-framed, bare, each one identical in size and spacing, lined against the wall like soldiers who'd been ordered to rest but never dismissed. No pillows, no sheets, only stripped mattresses that bore the faint depressions of spines long forgotten. Upstairs, 5 more, 11 in total. 11 beds for 11 bodies you cannot find. In the kitchen, the hearth sat cold, stuffed with mud and twigs, never burned. A child's high chair, warped and nailed to the floor beside it. Its tray permanently fixed, darkened not by time but by something thicker. No photographs, no dishes, no tools, not a single object that bore the weight of a person's story. And every mirror was gone, not just removed, wrenched from the wall with such force that the wood bore claw marks. Even the nails had been twisted from the inside, as if they'd been rejected. In the master room, a dresser heavier than it should be, pushed tight against a small, narrow closet door. Behind it, something that didn't belong. A panel, not wood, not plaster, stitched together with strips of hide, sealed at the corners with pitch. You pull, it snaps, and there it is, wrapped in linen, hardened by wax, heavy. A book, no title, no date, no author, just the scent of rot beneath resin, and the faint outline of a handprint scorched into the cloth. You don't open it, not yet, but your hands are already shaking. Inside, later, they would find words, reversed, written in blood. No names, only initials, no sentences, only instructions, no voice, only doctrine, and still no graves, no photographs, no journals, just this, the story of a family who left no trace of themselves except for what they became, and what they refused to let change. If you're still here, you're not just watching, you're participating. You've stepped into the same room they sealed shut. If that unsettles you, subscribe now. And if it doesn't, explain why in the comments. We'll be reading. The journal gave no names, but the county ledgers did. One name repeated, generation after generation. Between 1920 and 1960, the same surname appears in school enrollment forms, tithe records, and census logs. No variation, no spouses, no middle names, just initials, and silence. There were no marriages recorded, no births in hospitals, no funerals filed. 11 individuals in a structure with no address, no road, and no memory. Neighbors, if you could call them that, lived 2, sometimes 3 miles away. When asked decades later, not one could recall seeing a single member of the family. Not walking, not working, not worshiping, but the records insist they were there. In 1930, 5 names. In 1940, 9. In 1950, 11. Every line ends with the same last name, and every first name, just a reordering of the same few initials. M. R. L. Over and over. One child is listed as LML. Another Amar, scrawled beside a note. Same as above, but younger. There's no school attendance beyond 1925. A clerk once assigned to enforce rural enrollment compliance reported that the children were visible, but only behind glass. When he approached the home, a woman answered the door. She spoke slowly, not simply with caution but with delay, as if she was mimicking words she'd only ever heard once. He was never invited in. No further visits were scheduled. The file was closed. The birth registry continued to log children, some as late as 1959. But something changed. Maternal fields left blank. The father's name, always the same as the child's. Sometimes, both parent lines listed with a single initial. L. It didn't raise alarms. In that part of Kentucky, record-keeping was often sparse. Home births common. Suspicion alone wasn't proof of anything. But it wasn't the lack of records that unsettled the few who looked closer. It was the consistency. For decades, no outside blood, no deviation in naming, no burial sites, no death certificates, just a line on paper that never branched, never wavered, just looped. A family that existed on record, but never in memory, never in the eyes of those who should have seen them. Not a single photograph, not a single neighbor testimony that places them in motion. Just initials, pressed into time like a thumbprint that no longer leaves heat. These people didn't just vanish, they were removed. If you believe some stories are buried on purpose, then help us dig. Subscribe. And if not, tell us in the comments why this one should stay hidden. When they finally opened the journal, it didn't read like a diary. It read like a ritual. The pages were sealed with something brittle, dark wax at the edges, flaking like dried bark. The linen wrapping had preserved more than just paper. The ink inside, once thought faded, bloomed red again when touched by light. It wasn't ink. It was blood. 3 distinct types, human, and every word, every stroke, reversed, written from right to left in curling script, elegant in form but hollow in meaning. You couldn't read it at first, not with the naked eye. The message only emerged when reflected. Only in a mirror did the journal begin to speak. But it didn't speak in stories. There were no dates, no memories, no names, just short phrases repeated across decades. Etched in the same style, the same pressure, even as the hands that wrote them aged and failed. Retain what reflects. Only the clean shall breed. Fold the imperfect. The entries weren't personal. They weren't even human. They were instructions. Across the margins. Sketches. Hand-drawn. Anatomical. A child's spine, exaggerated and corrected. Teeth measured in millimeters. Jaw width. Palate height. A note beside one image. Speech delayed. Good symmetry. Another shows 2 outlines identical in every way but one. A mark above the eyes of the left figure. Underneath. Excised. Echo too soon. This was not observation. This was enforcement. There was no record of weather. No crops. No illness. Nothing of the outside world. The journal never referenced dates beyond the initials in its margins. LLJR Mr. over and over. At first, linguists thought it was some primitive record-keeping system, but it didn't align with any language, any liturgical format, or even cultic chants, because this wasn't a log. It was a mechanism. Every phrase, every correction, every instruction, it all turned inward, folded on itself. The logic of it wasn't chronological. It was circular, a self-replicating ideology, not a history, not a memory, not even madness. It was a blueprint, and by the time they realized what it was building, it was already too late. If you're starting to feel like you've read this before, you haven't. You're just seeing the shape now. If you want the truth to keep unfolding, subscribe. If not, say why in the comments. Just know it's already written. They never named the children. Not in the journal. Not in the census. Not even in the whispered margins of neighbor testimony. There were no nicknames, no baptisms, no birth announcements tucked into Bibles or carved into wood. Only initials. LL, Mr. Jr. Then again LL, Mr. Jr. Over and over, sometimes in a new order, sometimes reversed, but always the same few letters repeating across 4 decades, like a code that didn't evolve, just reasserted itself. One generation didn't replace the next. It became it. Handwriting from entries 40 years apart showed no stylistic deviation. The curls, the slants, the pressure identical. Even when the ink changed, the script remained unchanged. Like the hand that held the pen had simply kept going, even after the body behind it had rotted away. And the bodies did change, but only slightly. Narrow hips, identical hand spans, the same number of teeth always counted, always noted. One birth listed in the journal read, Mr. returns. Knees correct this time. Palate holds. No stammer. There was no celebration. No mother's name. No sentiment. Just the report. Another line. LL appears early. Hums before dawn. Contained. The entries didn't describe children. They described reflections. At first, the loop was generational. An uncle becomes a father. A niece becomes a mother. Bloodlines spiraling inward. But by the late 1940s, even that structure collapses. The roles begin to blur. M plus M equals R. Void of speech. Ears aligned. It wasn't a family. It was a formula. No one was born new. They were assigned. Trained to mimic what came before. To fold into the same posture, the same voice, the same silence. And those who couldn't, they weren't mourned. They were folded out. Some entries are marked only with the letter F. Others with S. And one, written shakily near the journal center, simply reads, Name drifted. Correction failed. No names. Only roles. Caretaker. Recorder. Mirror. Vessel. You don't inherit a role in this house. You absorb it. And once you do, you're never allowed to leave it. If you've made it this far, you've already entered their pattern. Break it, subscribe. If not, tell us below why you think you're strong enough to walk away. By the time the handwriting changed, the meaning had already begun to rot. Earlier entries were precise, curved in mirrored symmetry, reversed with discipline, almost elegance. But then the strokes thinned, the spacing narrowed, the lines crowded into margins as if something younger, smaller, was writing with urgency it didn't understand. These weren't mistakes. They were evolutions. A single page, dated only with a faded M, contains the full alphabet, backward. No corrections. No hesitation. Just 26 letters in reverse order, perfectly formed, perfectly spaced, mirrored without flaw. Not copied. Composed that way. This wasn't a cipher. It wasn't encryption. This was their native tongue. They didn't learn how to reverse writing. They were taught nothing else. Language had turned inward just like the bloodline. And those who resisted the loop? The journal doesn't describe punishments. It doesn't need to. Beside certain initials, always written in smaller hands, a single letter appears. In every instance, the entry ends there. No corrections follow. No future appearances. Just that mark. One child writes 2 words and vanishes. Asked aloud. Then as another entry, unsigned, says, he wrote forward, then, asterisk s, quieted, folded. You begin to realize the journal wasn't documenting failure. It was pruning it. Speech had become a deviation, expression a liability. To ask, to name, to speak in any way not already written was to risk removal. And yet, someone still tried. Somewhere in the final third of the journal, a smaller voice appears. The script is tight, uncomfortably exact. A child's hand, but one that's been trained, not taught. The lines don't wobble. They pulse. One entry. They told me I was born twice. Another. The mirror sees me before I do. And then silence again. Pages go blank. Not empty, just unwritten. Like a mouth opened and closed before breath could escape. The journal no longer reads like a record. It reads like a behavior, a function, a system training itself to survive without change. The language doesn't evolve. It tightens. The words don't explain. They repeat. The hand doesn't remember. It mimics. Until finally you understand. This wasn't a family that forgot how to speak. It was a house that taught them never to start. If you're still here, ask yourself this. How many times have you heard this already without realizing? If you feel like something is repeating, you're not wrong. Subscribe before the pattern resets. If you refuse, tell us in the comments which word was yours. They didn't draw like children. They drew like archivists, like surgeons, like believers. Dozens of sketches fill the latter half of the journal. Most are small, almost hidden, pressed into corners, buried in the folds of pages, etched into the binding itself. Not one is signed. Not one is labeled with a name. But all are precise, repeated, compared. The hands come first. Early drawings show 5 fingers, annotated with notes about nail curvature, joint rotation, thumb spread. But the digits shorten over time. For fingers, then 3. In one image, the hand is no longer segmented, just a single paddle-like shape rounded at the edge. The note beneath reads, "Good join, no cut." Next come the faces. None are fully detailed, just outlines. Jawlines, nasal bridges, orbital widths. Identical in proportion. Symmetry measured not by beauty, but by control. In later sketches, the features begin to disappear. Noses shrink. Mouths vanish. Ears are absent entirely. One profile is marked. No flair. A gap retained. Satisfied. There is no emotion. No attempt to capture expression. Because expression was never part of the goal. The bodies follow. Elongated limbs. Collapsing torsos. Narrow hips. Shrunken chests. Over time, sexual traits vanish. There is no indication of male or female. No markers of puberty. Just measurements. Ratios. Ratios refined. One figure, a full body drawing spanning 2 pages, stands arched unnaturally backward. Its arms hang below the knees. The spine curves like a question mark. No ears. No tongue. No hair. Underneath it. Still. No extra. Good spine. This wasn't anatomy. It was intention. A form reduced by choice. They weren't documenting deformity. They were pursuing it. Refining it. A forensic pathologist brought in to examine the images described it not as evolution, not even mutation, but biological sculpting through decay. A reverse engineering of the human form, cutting away what didn't reflect. Erasing everything that deviated. One figure is labeled. Held form. No droop. Another, cleft narrowed. Voice pending. There was pride in the notations. Pride in absence. Pride in reduction. They didn't want more. They wanted less. Not variety. Not difference. Only refinement. Until the bloodline wasn't a line at all, but a closed circle, tightening with each generation. Not born. Not bred. Maintained. This wasn't evolution. It was erosion. And someone recorded every moment of it. If you believe that story deserves to be heard, subscribe. And if not, tell us why you're okay with it staying forgotten. Near the end of the journal, after the language begins to fray and the script starts to lean, almost as if the hand itself is resisting what it's writing, a sentence appears that doesn't match the pattern. The third is not like them, speaks without sound. It's written smaller than the others in lighter blood, and is the only line on the page. No initials, no corrections, no follow-up, but everything that follows, the drawings, the pressure of the pen, the sudden absences, suggests that whatever this third was, it terrified them. The attic held 3 beds, low to the ground, narrower than the rest, each fitted with iron rings at the corners, rusted but still intact. Small lengths of chain, ending in buckles. No adult could have worn them. They were too tight, too short. Beneath the center bed, a dark stain blooms outward across the floorboards in a perfect semicircle. It wasn't discovered until years later, when the state returned with forensic tools. The blood had hardened into the grain, layer upon layer, years of it. And just above the floor, along the lower wall, scratch marks, uneven but deliberate, clustered at shoulder height for a child. Each slash vertical, not playful, not desperate, ritualized. There was no window in that room, only a board sealed with pitch. But beneath the seal, the glass was clouded from the inside. A fog of skin oil and condensation, pressed in the same place again and again. A single note was nailed to the inside of the closet, hidden beneath a strip of linen. Written in mirrored script, it read, "We hold what diverges." They didn't kill the third child. They studied it. They contained it, because it had broken the cycle. It did not mirror. It did not return. And it spoke without sound. When investigators finally tested the few biological samples left in the house, most matched, genetically indistinct, twisted around the same broken strain. But one, just one, didn't. A lock of hair, dark, thin, knotted at one end, hidden beneath the floorboards in a shallow cavity packed with wax and cloth. The mitochondrial DNA was human, but it didn't match the journal, didn't match the bedding, didn't match anyone. A ghost in the bloodline, a fracture the doctrine couldn't absorb. And after that entry, the journal begins to panic. Pages crowd with repetition. Phrases repeat across margins. Words smudge and blur. The script spirals, as if the hand behind it no longer trusted its own memory. As if the house itself was afraid of what had been born inside it. They had created something they could no longer predict. A voice that didn't echo. A reflection that didn't return. Some patterns are meant to be broken. Others correct themselves. If this child existed, so might the truth. Subscribe if you want to hear what came next. If not, say why below. And ask yourself, would you have kept them chained? They sealed everything. Not with locks or cement, but with intention. The final pages of the journal are erratic. Fragmented lines, phrases that repeat in descending strength. Ink that blots and bleeds as if the hand behind it had begun to forget how to hold its own voice. But one line stands apart. It's written cleanly, deliberately, 3 times, each repetition growing fainter. Seal the pantry, seal the names, let it be the grave. And it was. When investigators returned to the house in 1961, they found the pantry door nailed shut, not to keep food in, but to keep memory out. Inside, no supplies, just stones packed to the ceiling, layered in careful rows, as if someone believed weight alone could hold back history. The fireplace, never used, had been filled with hay, twisted into ropes, soaked in something that had hardened over time. Not to warm the house, but to silence it. Every mirror, if there had ever been mirrors, was gone. The nails where they once hung had been ripped sideways, splintered at the edges. In their place, slabs of pitch-dark wood, affixed so tightly to the walls they had become part of the frame. They weren't hiding their reflection. They were removing the possibility of it ever returning. And then, carved into the inner wall of the bedroom closet. Not written, not painted, but gouged, as if with a bone or rusted nail, 7 words. We could not be buried, so we became the house. No remains were ever found. No bones beneath the floorboards. No graves in the surrounding woods. No ash. No teeth. No trace. But the blood was still there. In the mattress seams. Along the base of the attic stairs. In handprints that didn't fade because they had soaked into wood. Not all of it was old. Some had dried recently, too recently. This house was not abandoned. It was inhabited by memory. They had not died. They had not escaped. They had not been buried. They had simply stopped needing to be seen. Because by then, the transformation was complete. There was no longer a line between the family and the walls that held them. Between the floorboards and the footsteps that never stopped. Between the blood that built them and the silence that sustained them. They didn't live in the house. They became it. If you think they died, you're wrong. They just stopped being seen. Subscribe before this story folds in on itself again. If you refuse, explain why. We'll be watching the comments. It didn't end with the house. In 1971, a university research team petitioned to reopen the Pine Hollow Journal for linguistic and behavioral analysis. They were granted access to just 17 pages. No more. By the end of the second week, one analyst had requested psychiatric leave, citing insomnia and disassociation. Another abandoned the project after describing a sensation he couldn't name, a soft reversal, he called it, like being turned inward. Several reported dreaming in mirrored corridors. One claimed she saw handwriting, her own, on the walls of a room she'd never entered. She stopped writing entirely after that. The team's notes became increasingly erratic. Margins filled with symbols. Words dropped vowels. Paragraphs inverted midline. And then the report stopped. Not concluded. Stopped. The official summary, signed and sealed by the Department of Health, contained only one sentence. It doesn't teach. It replicates. From that moment forward, the journal ceased to exist publicly. The government invoked Medical Ethics Clause 27b, an obscure statute originally meant to suppress unauthorized records of psychological experimentation. The journal was placed in a sealed, unmarked annex under psychiatric restriction. Not archived, not preserved, quarantined. The location was redacted. The file name changed to Object 012. The language in the paperwork deliberately clinical. Words like non-narrative, self-harming, cognitively contaminating. Not because of what the journal said, but because of what it could become. For decades, nothing surfaced. The house was quietly delisted. Satellite images showed no changes, no structural collapse, no disturbance in the earth around it, but also no decay. Nothing eroded, nothing grew. And then, in 2007, a box appeared at a minor estate auction in Laurel County, Kentucky. Unmarked, water-damaged, sold for $8. Inside, a child's writing slate, a length of hand-braided twine, and a small notebook, cloth-bound, soft with handling. No name, no date, no title, but inside mirrored handwriting. Identical initials, same symbols, same voice, a child's voice. One line repeated over 20 pages. If I am the new, why do I remember the old? On the back cover, barely visible in graphite. This time, I will stay inside. And the hand that wrote it? Tested. Matched. A perfect forensic twin to entries made over 70 years earlier. No one can explain how. No one will. Because some houses don't rot. Some bloodlines don't fade. And some stories don't survive to be told. They replicate themselves. In ink. In voice. In you. This was never just history. It was instruction. If you felt something stir while listening, something quiet, something familiar, it's already working. Subscribe before it finds another page. And if you refuse, tell us why below. Just don't write it backward. This was Cursed Chronicles. And not everything buried stays dead. What story are you brave enough to remember next?